Welcome to the parish of Alstonville. So friends, a miracle has happened in our time. On Thursday, January the 15th, 2009, flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport, New York City, bound for North Carolina. I don't know why I would want to go to North Carolina, but there you have it. The plane was heading north over the Bronx, and 2 minutes after takeoff, the plane had a double strike. A flock of geese took out first one and then the other engine. They lost power. Faced with utter disaster, Chesley Sullenberger had to make some critical decisions. They had about 2 or 3 minutes to do so. The nearby airports were too far away. The only option was to land on the Hudson River. It is not easy to land on water. Land too soon or too late, you miss the water. Land too hard, the plane breaks into pieces. A number of important actions had to be taken in those crucial 2 minutes. Amazingly, the pilot makes a decision, informs air traffic control, and then ends communication so that there is no debate. Don't you just love decisive leadership? The pilots turn off the engines. They had to set the right speed so that the plane would glide as long as possible. They had to keep the nose of the plane down so that it would maintain speed, but at the last moment they would have to lift the nose up so that the plane wouldn't shatter into pieces on hitting the water. They had to disconnect the autopilot. They had to glide the plane in a sharp left-hand turn and then straighten up at the last minute to land on this narrow strip, the Hudson River. All 155 people on board were safe. Many described the event as a miracle. I can see Jeff listening like this, making sure I'm getting all the aerodynamics correct. Do I pass? I pass. So while the safe landing of Flight 1549 is brilliant, and it's a spectacular demonstration of the power of acquired habits, on closer examination, the successful landing of Flight 1549 is a result of a number of factors. First, the intensive training of the disciples. Listen to me. My field, their field. The intensive training, in this case, of the pilots. We have to remember that for the end of the sermon. The second factor, years of experience. Chesley Sullenberger was near retirement, so he's all these accumulated years of experience. He retired after this incident. I think maybe he thought that you only get to do that successfully once in your career. As the saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, skydiving is not for you. The third thing, I think, is confidence in his training. Courage, but also restraint. Cool judgment under pressure, being calm and centered, but I think most of all concern and care for his passengers, doing right for others. Folks, none of these things come naturally. If they came naturally, you and I would be able to land that plane easy peasy in the Hudson River. Any volunteers? No, I didn't think so. I'm glad Jeff isn't volunteering. His eyesight's not that good. I don't want him in the plane or a helicopter anytime soon. So a miracle like this happens all the time, And it happens when a person makes 1,000 small decisions, which in the early years require effort and concentration. When the crunch comes, these decisions have become second nature. It was second nature to those two pilots to take the steps they took, to land the plane safely. It was many years of practice, of study, of training, of experience. It is precisely this aspect of what becomes second nature that best describes the way of love. On the screen you'll see a picture of the way of love, and this is our theme for the year. A way of love is a life centered on Jesus and the regular disciplines or practices that make such a life possible. So the way of love you see before you has 7 disciplines that make a way of love possible. Turn, learn, pray, worship, go, rest, bless. A way of love is a way of decentering the self to make God the center of our lives. Do you remember at one no, you don't remember, but apparently at one stage in human history, we thought the earth was the center of the universe. And it took people many years to come to terms with the fact that no, actually the sun is the center of the universe. And this same process needs to happen in us. It was Copernicus that made, well, we think someone before him, but he gets the credit. Copernicus said the sun was at the center of the universe. We call it the Copernican revolution. And for each of us, we need a Copernican revolution. The earth is not the center of the universe. We are not the center of the universe. The sun is. The way of love is a way of decentering the self so that Christ, and not the selfish I, is the center of our lives. The way of love becomes the way of life. It's exceedingly practical. In a way of love, we live from the true self, which is the presence of Christ within us. Living a life of love is costly, but it's the only life worth living. In the words of Michael Curry, I'm going to try an American accent, hoping it doesn't sound like Russian. He says, a way of love ain't microwave religion, folks. Close? No? Okay, we won't do that again. A way of love is not microwave religion. In other words, it takes time. It takes consistent practice of disciplines such as turn, learn, worship, pray, rest, go, bless. Last week, using the beautiful poem by Wendell Berry, Doug reflected on the spiritual practice of rest as a practice in the way of love. Today, using the Gospel of Mark chapter 8, we reflect on the practice of learn in the way of love. Adopting rest as a spiritual practice, I'm all on board. That sounds wonderful. When can I sign it in? Why adopt learn as a spiritual practice? Why invest all this time and difficulty in study as a practice in the way of love? Learn means to study Jesus and the resources that help us to understand Jesus better in a way of love. Obviously, those resources are the Bible, but once you study Jesus in the New Testament, you will notice that he didn't really have such a reverence for the Bible that we do. He often said things like, oh, you have heard it said, but ignore that, I say unto you. So, for example, oh, you've heard it said, love your neighbours, hate your enemies. Ignore all of that, I say to you, love your enemies. That's not very respectful, Jesus. So the Bible is one guide to learn the pattern of Jesus, and an important guide. But there's also other sacred texts that help us describe what following Jesus may look like. So why adopt this as a habit? Well, the fact of the matter is, day by day, moment by moment, we are bombarded by information all the time. And it's truer today than it ever has been in history. Gradually, these repeated patterns of information form and shape us. And we can see evidence of that all around us. The fake news has produced some really interesting cartoon characters in our time. We have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate source of information that will help us live the best life possible? Here's a clue: the answer is not Google, and it's not Facebook, nor is it Twitter. There's a cartoon of a young man on his mobile phone, and his mother says to him, when the priest said follow Jesus, she did not mean on Twitter. The pattern of Jesus, as revealed to us in the Bible and other texts, this is the pattern that must shape our lives. And if we don't learn as a spiritual practice, it will be the pattern of the world that will shape us. That would not be an abundant life. This is precisely what Paul means in Romans chapter 12. Listen to the two different translations. Both translations depict the necessity of learn as a spiritual discipline in a way of love. NIV, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Pretty straightforward. The New Living Translation, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. So that's it. The spiritual discipline of learn means that we don't copy the behavior and patterns of this world, but we let God transform us through renewing our minds. We practice learn so that the pattern of Jesus can become my pattern. Michael Curry again. We want to engage in the world on the word's terms, not the world's terms. Without learn, we unconsciously respond to life according to the patterns of this world. Let me prove it to you. Survival of the pattern of the world. The pattern of Jesus is survival of the meek and the humble and the lowly. The lion is king of the jungle. Domination paradigm, not the paradigm of Jesus. God helps those who help themselves. That is just such rubbish. It is just such a paradigm of the world. The pattern of Jesus is God helps those who cannot help themselves. So if you can help yourself, you're in a really bad place. If you are independent and self-sufficient, woe is you. Do you see how the pattern of the world has shaped our minds? We have to learn the pattern of Jesus. So we adopt this powerful habit of learn because we want the word to master us. Already we've been mastered by the world, and it's not good enough. We read the Bible, and guess what? The Bible reads us. Am I the only one that's had that feeling? You think you're reading the Bible, but actually it's reading you, giving you a diagnosis. It is a sharp, two-edged sword, cutting where the bone and marrow meet, which means it really, really hurts. But it's judgment for the sake of renewal. So this is what's happening in Mark chapter 8, folks. we have a clear demonstration of what happens when we allow the pattern of the world to shape us and not the pattern of Jesus. This is what Jesus means when he rebukes Peter. Your mind is not on divine things, Peter. It is on human things. That's our question. Do we want our mind on human things or divine things? Let's have some compassion for Peter. Peter is growing up as a Hebrew under the oppression of the Romans. So this is nothing like the oppression of the Americans or the British before them, although wherever the British went was pretty much a disaster, but that's for another sermon. Their oppression was utterly brutal. He would have grown up all the time with political freedom fighters dying on crosses across the road where he walks and where he lives. Can you imagine? You're going to Coles to do your shopping, and there at the front door is some poor guy dying on the cross slowly over 5 days. Utterly, utterly, utterly brutal. But Peter is also deeply spiritual, and his culture and tradition have promised him that a time will come when God will send a Messiah, and the Messiah will join forces with the leaders of that day and bring down the Romans, and we will re-establish the kingdom of David forever. It's kind of the equivalent of an Arthurian legend. They're looking forward to that time. Now imagine, Peter's been following this man Jesus, he's witnessed miracles, and this is what's happened right before Jesus really gives him a talking to. Twice now, Jesus has created this Eucharist feast in the wilderness. We're in chapter 8, and right at the end of chapter 6, the beginning of chapter 7, there's this huge crowd of people, and there's the feeding of the 4,000, not counting women and children. Have you ever thought about that? This is not a feminist moment, and it's not masculine chauvinism at all. Think about it. Not counting women and children. What is the Bible really saying? Peter's thinking, these 4,000 men, army, right? These people are following Jesus. We've got 4,000 men. Right, the time's come. We can take these Romans out, no problem. Yeah? 4,000 men, huge army. Then, right before this moment in chapter 8, guess what? Jesus does it again. There's another crowd. This time we are told there's 5,000 men. We're told there's 5,000 people this time. So I don't know what's different in the maths of Peter and the writers of the Bible. Maybe they've decided, well, if men can fight, maybe women can too. You know, after all, there's the Vikings. So now we've got two armies, 4,000 men and 5,000 people. The moment's come. The promise has come true. The Messiah is here. People are following, two armies. Let's take them out. So this is my version of what Peter was saying to Jesus. And Jesus goes, Peter, you are seriously, seriously dumb. Have you not listened to a word that I've been saying? You call me the Messiah. I call myself the very human one. And the very human one must suffer and die. Instead of leading a war alongside the traditional leaders to re-establish the reign of David against the Roman ones, the very human one, me, will be murdered by a coalition of traditional leaders with the Roman oppression and will die. And Peter's like, no, that's not in the Bible. The true humanity of Jesus, humanity defined by love, is contrasted with this non-humane brutality of the powers, the Roman authority, the economic powers, the religious powers. And this is just too much for Peter. Without the discipline of learn on the way of love, Peter, like all of us, has allowed the patterns of the world and the myth of religious violence, the myth of redemptive violence to become his pattern. In contrast, the pattern of Jesus is to die to death itself. The pattern of Jesus is to die to violence, to die to the myth of redemptive violence, to die to violence itself, to love enemies and to see every enemy as a gift from God. The threat to put people to death is the ultimate power of the domination system. That's the power of the Romans. The power to put you to death. This is how they maintain power. So do you see the genius of Jesus? If you die to the threat of death, it loses its power completely. Resist this fear of death and pursue love, regardless of the consequences, and the domination system caves in on itself, has no authority whatsoever. To die to the threat of death, that's not easy. It's first nature to survive. If we're going to die to the threat of death, it's going to take some work. It's a habit that is built up over time through an intentional study of Jesus and through the discipline of learn. And what is it we learn from Jesus? We let his pattern of loving our enemies, of seeing enemies as a gift, of resisting violence. We allow this pattern to become our pattern. And this is a question Jesus asks of all of us. Will we take up the cross? Will we allow the pattern of Jesus to be our pattern? And let's be clear, to take up the cross is not to endure kind of private suffering. This is not pitiful, pious, religious martyrdom. You know, you've got naughty children, oh, it's my cross to bear, I'll just carry my cross. You know, you've got a difficult wife or a difficult husband, oh, that's just my cross to bear, I'll carry my cross. That's not what it means at all. The cross means to receive the full punishment for treason. That's what it means. Nelson Mandela took up the cross when he agreed to treason for the sake of equality. Whatever your thoughts about Julian Assange, it is clear that there were political consequences for his decision to share truth. And he has taken up a cross. To take up the cross is to take political action against the powers for the sake of love. It is not easy, but it can become second nature. I would like to end with a quote from Walter Wink. And he's been the winner of Theological Books of the Year for 3 years running. This is his book, Engaging the Powers. And although it is written in the late 80s and the early 90s, it is prophetic for our time in Australia, where Christianity is under assault. He says this: every dynamic new force for change is undergirded by rigorous disciplines. The slack decadence of culture Christianity cannot produce athletes of the spirit. Those who are the bearers of tomorrow undergo what others might call disciplines, but not to punish themselves or to ingratiate themselves to God. They simply do what is necessary to stay spiritually alive, just as they eat food and drink water. Just read it one more time. Every dynamic new force for change is undergirded by rigorous disciplines. The slack decadence of culture Christianity cannot produce athletes of the spirit. Those who are bearers of tomorrow undergo what others might call disciplines, but not to punish themselves or to ingratiate themselves to God. They simply do what is necessary to stay spiritually alive, just as they eat food and drink water. Let us pray for the world and for the church.
Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Render to no one evil for evil.
Support the weak. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Give honor and dignity to all.
Love and serve the Lord, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit and the blessing of the God of love, source of all being, eternal Word and Holy Spirit, be on you, those you love and those you pray for, now and forever. Amen.